The Winchester's barrel trembled against Caleb Harrow's shoulder. He aimed through the driving snow, his breath a ghost in the Wyoming air. Down in the valley, a woman lay bleeding next to her dead horse, and she had his dead wife's face. Almost. The jaw was sharper, the hair a shade darker where it spilled from her hat. But the eyes, good Lord, those were Eliza's eyes, staring up at him through the storm like a judgment sent from the grave itself. He'd been on the trail of the Morrison gang for 3 days. 3 days of bitter cold and stale coffee. But this was something else. As he watched the woman try to stand on a clearly broken ankle, something inside his chest, frozen solid for 2 long years, began to crack. The smart move was to ride away. Let the blizzard take her. Let her become another ghost in a land full of them. Caleb Harrow knew a thing or two about ghosts. He lived with one every single day. But then she looked up again, and those familiar eyes filled with a desperate, impossible hope, and a question burned through him like a branding iron. What happens when the past refuses to stay dead? 3 miles from his cabin, Caleb made his choice. He slid from his horse, silent as a shadow, his boots sinking into the snow. The woman was crawling toward a small stand of pines, dragging her ruined leg behind her. "Easy," he said, his voice a rough growl from disuse. "I'm not here to hurt you." She spun around and the shock of her face hit him like a punch. Where Eliza had been soft summer rain, this woman was a thunderstorm, a beauty with an edge, a rose that had grown thorns to survive. "Stay back," she hissed, her hand diving into her coat. It came out holding a derringer, small but deadly. Her hand was shaking, but it wasn't just from the cold. Caleb raised his palm, slow and easy. "Lady, you're bleeding out and a blizzard's coming that'll turn us both to ice before sunrise. You can shoot me, or you can let me help." He paused, letting the wind carry his next words. "Your choice." Those eyes, God, those eyes. They searched his face, drilling into him, like she was looking for a name, a memory. "You're him," she whispered, the words like a slap across his face. "You're Caleb Harrow." The name just hung there in the freezing air. A curse, a reputation. Most of it bad. Caleb's hand drifted toward the Colt on his hip. It was pure instinct. "Who's asking?" "Lia Crane." Her voice was steady, even through the pain. "Eliza's sister." The world went silent. The wind stopped. The snow held its breath. Eliza had a sister, a school teacher back in Denver, too proud to come west. She thinks the frontier will make her soft. Eliza had laughed once, her fingers in his hair. She doesn't understand that soft things don't survive out here. This woman, bleeding in the snow, was anything but soft. "What are you doing here?" Caleb asked, his voice tight. Leia's smile was all ice. "I came to meet my famous brother-in-law, to look him in the eye when I asked him why he let my sister die." The words were a physical blow. He'd been living with that same question for 2 years. Every night he closed his eyes, he saw the blood on the Denver road. "Ma'am, I don't know what you heard." "I heard enough," she shot back, trying to stand again, a gasp of pain escaping her lips. "Sarah McKinnon wrote to me, told me everything, how you knew the Morrison gang was hitting that road, how you had a choice." She looked him dead in the eye, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "And you let her go anyway." Sarah McKinnon, a name like bitter herbs, a woman who'd wanted Caleb and turned to poison when he chose Eliza instead. The first snowflakes of the real storm began to fall, thick and heavy. They had minutes. "Lady, I don't give a damn what Sarah told you," Caleb said, his voice flat and hard. "But unless you want to die out here proving a point, we need to move. Now." He reached for her. She swung the derringer toward his heart. "Don't you touch me." The little gun wavered. He saw the fight in her eyes, but he also saw the strength draining out of her. The cold and the pain were winning, and then they won. The derringer fell from her numb fingers into the snow. She collapsed, her face a mask of gray. Without another word, he scooped her into his arms. She was lighter than Eliza, all sharp angles and lean muscle, built for a fight. "I hate you," she whispered against his neck as he carried her to his horse. "Good," Caleb grunted, his breath pluming in the air. "Hate'll keep you warm." He swung her up onto his saddle, settling her in front of him. But as he did, he heard something else in her voice. Underneath the hate, something that made his blood run cold. It was hunger, the same desperate, aching hunger he saw in his own reflection every morning. And Caleb Harrow knew, with the chilling certainty of a man walking to his own hanging, that Leah Crane was going to destroy him. The only question was, would he let her? The cabin hit Leah like a physical blow. It was all there, just as Eliza had described in her letters. The huge Riverstone fireplace, the bearskin rug, the table Caleb had built with his own two hands. But the letters hadn't prepared her for the ghost. Eliza's presence was everywhere. Her sewing basket by the hearth, a needle still stuck in a patch. Her favorite blue dress hanging on a peg, as if she'd just taken it off. Leah could almost smell the lavender soap she used to use. Caleb carried her inside and set her down gently in a leather chair by the fire. Eliza's chair. The realization was a sharp, twisting pain. The firelight danced across his face, and she saw him clearly for the first time. He wasn't the monster she'd imagined. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with hands that knew hard work. But there was a gentleness in the way he knelt to check her ankle, his touch surprisingly careful. A scar ran from his temple to his jaw, old and white, but deep. His eyes were the color of a winter sky, and they held the weight of 1,000 sorrows. "It's not broken," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Twisted bad, though. It'll heal." He moved with a quiet efficiency, getting water, tearing strips of a clean shirt for a bandage. But she saw the slight tremor in his hands. She saw how he avoided looking directly at her face. Because I look like her, she thought. Every time he looks at me, he sees her. "Why did you let her go alone?" she asked, her voice sharp as he wrapped her ankle. His hands stilled. "I didn't let her do anything. Your sister was never a woman who could be told what to do. Sarah said you knew. Said you knew about the Morrison gang." Caleb's jaw tightened. Sarah McKinnon has her own reasons for spreading lies. So she was lying? He stood up abruptly, turning his back to her to face the fire. The light carved his silhouette against the dark cabin walls. "I'm saying it's complicated." Anger flared hot in her chest. "Complicated? My sister is dead, Caleb. What part of that is complicated?" He didn't turn around. His shoulders seemed to slump under an invisible weight. "Your sister had cancer." The words sucked the air from the room. Leah's vision swam. For a second, she couldn't breathe. "What?" "Stomach cancer," he said, his voice hollow. It had been eating her up for months. She wasn't going to Denver for shopping. She was going to see a specialist. That's impossible. She would have told me." "She made me promise not to," he said, his voice cracking. "She wanted to handle it with dignity. On her own terms. She even made me sleep in the barn the last few weeks. Couldn't stand me seeing her weak." Leah's mind raced back through Eliza's last letters. They had been shorter, the handwriting more careful, more labored. She had just assumed her sister was busy, happy in her new life. "You're lying," she whispered, but the words had no conviction. Caleb turned, and the raw agony in his eyes stole her breath. "I begged her not to go that day. I told her the roads weren't safe, that I'd heard talk about the Morrisons. But she said the doctor could only see her that day. She said cancer doesn't wait." He walked to the mantel and picked up a small wooden box. He opened it. Inside, Leah saw the amber bottles. Laudanum, morphine, medicines for a pain that had no cure. "I demanded to go with her," he said, his voice breaking completely now. "But she said she couldn't bear the thought of dying in front of me. She wanted me to remember her strong." The room spun. Everything she believed, the entire foundation of her hatred, was crumbling to dust. "So when the Morrisons hit that coach, I was at home," he finished, his voice laced with self-loathing, "chopping wood, telling myself I was respecting her wishes when I was really just being the worst kind of coward." He laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "When they brought her body back, when I saw what they'd done to her, I knew. I should have been there. I should have died with her." The silence in the cabin was heavy, broken only by the howl of the rising storm outside. "The last thing she said," Leah whispered, her throat tight, In the letter Sarah sent, she mentioned Eliza's last words. Caleb closed his eyes, pain etched on his face. She said, "Don't let them know about," and then she was gone. I never knew what she was trying to say. "Don't let them know about the cancer," Laya breathed, the terrible truth settling in her soul. Even then, even dying, Eliza was trying to protect her secret, her pride. "Oh God," she whispered, "what have I done?" But Caleb wasn't looking at her. He was staring at a photograph on the mantel. A daguerreotype of Eliza in her wedding dress, radiant and full of life. "You look so much like her," he said softly. "Same eyes, same smile, when you're not trying to kill me. But you're different too. Stronger, maybe. More fight in you." There was something in his tone that made the hair on her arm stand up. The way he was looking at her now wasn't as a brother-in-law. It was the way a man looks at a woman. A look that made her suddenly aware of her torn dress, of her hair loose around her shoulders. "Mr. Harrow, Caleb," she stammered. I, I'm sorry. I wanted someone to blame. Grief needs a place to go, and you were there." He turned to face her fully, and the firelight caught the raw hunger in his eyes. The same desperate need she felt coiled in her own gut. "I know the feeling." The air between them crackled. It grew thick, heavy, electric. Leia could feel her own pulse hammering in her throat. She could see the rise and fall of his chest like a man struggling for air. "This is wrong," she whispered. "Yeah," he breathed, taking a step closer. "It is." He took another step, and she didn't move. She couldn't, because in that space between grief and guilt, between hatred and hunger, something new and terrifying was being born. It felt like salvation. It felt like damnation. The storm raged outside, a physical manifestation of the tempest inside the cabin. And as Caleb reached out, his fingers trembling like aspen leaves to touch her face, Laya knew one thing for sure. Everything was about to change. The only question was whether either of them would survive it. 3 days. 3 days the blizzard raged, holding them prisoner in that ghost-haunted cabin. By the second night, Leia understood that temptation wasn't just a word. It was a living, breathing thing. It was in the way Caleb's shirt stretched across his broad back when he chopped wood. It was in the careful, measured distance he kept between them, as if a single touch would set them both on fire. It was in the stolen glances, the moments his winter gray eyes would lock on hers before he'd look away, a flicker of something like panic in their depths. "You don't have to sleep on the floor," she'd said that first night, her voice tight as he laid out blankets by the hearth. "Yes," he'd growled back, his voice rougher than the wind outside. "I do." But on the second night, the temperature plummeted. Frost spiderwebbed across the inside of the window panes. Propriety was a luxury they could no longer afford. "You'll freeze to death," Leia stated, lifting the edge of the heavy quilt on the bed. Eliza's bed. "And I'll freeze watching you." He stood in the doorway for a long moment, a man facing his own execution. He wore only his long johns and that haunted look she was coming to know so well. "Leia, it's just for warmth," she lied, her heart hammering. "Just survival." He finally slid beneath the covers, the mattress dipping with his weight. He was careful to keep a pillow wedged between them, a desperate, flimsy barrier. But they both knew it was useless. She could feel the heat radiating from him, a furnace in the icy room. She could hear the slow, deliberate rhythm of his breathing as he fought to pretend she wasn't there. But it was hard to pretend when the scent of him, wood smoke, leather, and something purely male, filled her senses until her head swam. "Tell me about her," Leia whispered into the darkness. "Tell me about Eliza when she was happy." She felt him tense beside her. "Why?" "Because I need to remember her that way. All I have are letters. You. You had the real thing." The silence stretched, and she thought he wouldn't answer. Then his voice came, soft and filled with a kind of wonder, like a man rediscovering a lost memory. "She used to sing," he said. "Old Irish songs her mother taught her, had the voice of an angel, and the temper of a she-cat when she was crossed." He paused. "She tried to teach me to dance once. We nearly broke both our feet." Leia smiled in the dark. She wrote me about that. Said you danced like a bear with two left feet. A low chuckle rumbled from his chest, the first real sound of humor she'd heard from him. Well, she wasn't wrong. They talked all night. They talked about Eliza. They talked about the life she'd built, the woman they had both loved so differently. And with every shared memory, the barrier between them crumbled, piece by piece. It started with small things. His fingers brushing hers as he passed her a cup of coffee. The way his eyes would linger on her lips when he thought she wasn't looking. The careful charged dance they did around each other in the confines of the small cabin. On the third day it happened. He was fixing a shutter the wind had torn loose. She was holding the board steady for him. He leaned in close to check the angle, and his breath was warm on her neck. Without thinking, she turned her head. Suddenly they were face to face, so close she could see the flecks of gold in his gray eyes. So close she could feel the heat of his skin. Laya, he whispered. Her name on his lips was both a prayer and a curse. I know, she breathed back. She knew they were on a cliff's edge. She knew they should step back, knew they should remember the dead woman who haunted every corner of this room. But knowing and doing were two very different things. His hand came up, calloused and gentle, to cup her cheek. His thumb traced the line of her bottom lip, a touch so reverent it made her knees weak. She leaned into it. This is madness, he rasped, but his other hand was already tangling in her hair, tilting her head back. Yes, she agreed, and pulled his mouth down to hers. The kiss wasn't gentle, it was a storm. It was 2 years of grief and loneliness and desperate hunger crashing together. He kissed her like a drowning man taking his last breath, and she answered with a ferocity that shocked them both. His hands were everywhere, in her hair, on her throat, pulling her body flush against his until there was no space left between them. He lifted her onto the workbench, settling himself between her thighs, and a universe of stars exploded behind her eyelids. God, Laya, he groaned against her skin, his lips finding the sensitive spot just below her ear. I've tried. I've tried so hard not to want this. Her reply was a soft cry as his mouth moved lower, his hands fumbling with the buttons of her dress. The rough wool gave way to the thin cotton of her chemise. She felt his lips on the curve of her breast through the fabric and thought she might actually die from the sheer pleasure of it. Her own hands were clumsy, desperate, tearing at the buttons of his shirt, needing to feel his skin. When her palms finally met the hard muscle of his chest, the scarred landscape of old battles, a shudder ran through his entire body. I should stop, he said, his voice thick, but his hands were already pushing the chemise from her shoulders. We should stop. Don't, she whispered, the word broken and raw. Please, don't stop. But even as she arched against him, her body screaming for more, her eyes fell on something that turned her blood to ice. On the windowsill right above them sat Eliza's jewelry box. The lid was carved with a single perfect rose, and it felt like that rose was staring at her, a silent, wooden accusation. She was in her sister's house, in her sister's husband's arms, betraying everything. A gasp escaped her lips, half pleasure, half horror. She pushed against his chest, her hands suddenly desperate. No, we can't. I can't do this. The spell shattered. Caleb stumbled back, his face a whirlwind of confusion, then hurt, then dawning, terrible understanding as he followed her gaze to the jewelry box. Jesus, he breathed, running a shaking hand through his hair. What are we doing? Laya clutched the front of her dress, suddenly, painfully aware of how exposed she was. I don't know. I don't know. The silence that fell was thick with shame. Outside, the storm was finally breaking. Weak winter sunlight began to filter through the windows. The weather's clearing, Caleb said, his voice carefully, painfully neutral. Yes. Laya fumbled with her buttons, her hands shaking too much to work properly. I should go. Go where? The question was sharper than he intended. You came here with nothing but the clothes on your back. Where in God's name do you plan to go? She finally met his eyes, and what she saw there made her heart ache. It wasn't just desire anymore. It was something deeper, something that looked terrifyingly like love. I don't know, she admitted, her voice small, but I can't stay here. Not after this. Not in her house? What we almost did, Caleb said quietly, his voice raw, was honor the living instead of worshiping the dead. Don't, she snapped, the word a whip crack. Don't you dare tell me what my sister would have wanted. You didn't even know her well enough to see she was dying right in front of you. The blow landed. His face went white, then hard as granite. You're right, he said, his voice dead. I guess I didn't know her at all. And I sure as hell don't know you. He turned away. But as Leah gathered her meager belongings, they both knew he was lying. In 3 days, trapped by the storm, they had seen into each other's souls. And that knowledge was the most dangerous thing of all. By morning, the trail to town would be clear. Leah Crane would be gone, and the fragile hope that had started to grow in Caleb's chest would be gone with her. But they both knew. Some doors once opened can never be closed again. The only question was what new horrors were about to walk through. Dawn didn't just bring sunlight, it brought Amos Whitaker and 6 of his men. Their horses steamed in the cold air, materializing out of the morning mist like demons. Caleb heard them before he saw them. The creak of saddle leather, the jingle of spurs, the quiet, deliberate sound of horses held at a walk by men who wanted to send a message. Company, he said quietly, his hand instinctively checking the cylinder of his Colt. Leah looked up from her packing, her face sharp with alarm. What kind of company? The worst kind. Through the window they could see Whitaker's bulky form. He was a big man, soft in the middle but hard everywhere else, with pale, merciless eyes. Behind him sat Dutch Anders, his foreman, and 5 other hard cases Caleb knew from the saloons in Red Rock. Mrs. Crane! Whitaker's voice boomed across the clearing, slick with false courtesy. If you're in there, ma'am, you might want to come out. There's been some concern for your reputation. Leah's face went pale. Out here, a woman's reputation was everything. An accusation like this could ruin her. The bastard, Caleb muttered. He'd been expecting this. In a place like Red Rock, gossip spread faster than a prairie fire. What does he want? Leah whispered, her eyes wide. My land, Caleb said grimly. The water rights that come with it. This is just his excuse. Through the window, they watched Whitaker make a show of checking his pocket watch. Now, Mrs. Crane, I know you're a decent woman. Surely you can see how this looks. An unmarried lady, shacked up for 3 days with a man of questionable character. Questionable character. The words stung. In the 2 years since Eliza's death, Caleb had watched his name turn to mud. The war hero had become the town coward. It didn't matter that it wasn't true. Truth was always the first casualty. You don't have to do this, Caleb said, his voice low. There's a root cellar out back. You can be on the main road before they even know you're gone. But Leah was already moving to the door, her spine straight as a gun barrel. No, I'm not running. She turned to face him, and the fire in her eyes was so much like Eliza's, it made his heart clench. I came here to face the truth. I'm not leaving until I do. Before he could argue, she flung the door open and stepped onto the porch. The morning sun lit up her hair, turning it to fire. Chin high, defiant, she was magnificent. Mr. Whitaker, she called out, her voice clear and steady. Since you've brought an army, I assume you have something important to say. Whitaker's smile was as cold as a tombstone. Indeed, ma'am. It's come to my attention you've been residing here, unchaperoned, with a man who is not your husband. What of it? The simple, direct question clearly took Whitaker by surprise. He'd expected tears, denials. He got steel. Well, such arrangements are not proper for a lady of your station. My station? Leah's voice took on an edge that could cut steel. And what station is that, Mr. Whitaker? The station of a woman who accepted shelter in a blizzard? Or the station of a woman who doesn't need your permission to live her life? Behind Whitaker, Dutch Anders smirked. Careful, Missy. You're talking to the man who practically owns this valley. Practically, Leah repeated, her voice dripping with scorn. But not actually. How very disappointing for him. Caleb had to fight a smile. Eliza had been fierce, but Leah was a bolt of lightning. Now see here, Whitaker blustered, his face turning red. I am trying to be a gentleman about this. I am trying to preserve what's left of your good name. And if she insists on being difficult, a new voice said, then what? Every man turned. Caleb was standing in the doorway, moving with the fluid grace of a predator. His hand rested on the butt of his Colt. You'll do what, exactly, Whitaker? I'll do what's necessary to protect the decent folk of this valley from your kind, Harrow. The threat was plain. Caleb could see the glint of sunlight on rifle barrels hidden in the trees surrounding the cabin. An ambush. You want my land, Amos? Just say it. Don't hide behind a woman's reputation. Whitaker laughed, a raw, ugly sound. Your land, boy, after what you've done, letting your own wife die, and now corrupting her innocent sister. You'll be lucky if we let you leave this valley alive. A cold, familiar rage uncoiled in Caleb's gut, the same feeling he'd had just before a battle. His fingers tightened on his gun. Careful, Whitaker, you're about to cross a line. Am I? Whitaker's voice rose, playing to his men. Tell me, Harrow, what kind of man lets his wife ride into an ambush? What kind of man takes up with her sister before the body's even cold in the ground? The kind of man, Caleb said, his voice dropping to a deadly quiet, who is done listening to your poison, the kind of man who has nothing left to lose. Caleb, don't, Leah pleaded. He's not worth it. But it was too late. Whitaker's hand was already a blur, diving for the gun on his hip. Time slowed down. Caleb's draw was muscle memory, a thing of deadly beauty. The Colt seemed to leap into his hand. The hammer fell. The shot cracked across the valley like the thunder of God. Whitaker's gun, not even clear of its holster, went spinning through the air. The big man howled, clutching a hand that was now a bloody ruin. Jesus Christ! Dutch Anders yelled, his own gun half drawn. A second shot from Caleb's Colt splintered the porch post right next to Dutch's head. Sawdust sprayed his face. The next one won't miss, Caleb said, his voice conversational, but his eyes were as cold and hard as frozen stone. Silence. The only sound was Whitaker's ragged breathing. Slowly, hands moved away from guns and back to saddle horns. This isn't over, Harrow, Whitaker snarled, cradling his shattered hand. You can't protect her forever, and I will remember this. The threat was clear. As long as Caleb was here, Leah was a target. Amos, a new voice said, calm and carrying an iron authority. I believe you've said quite enough. Every head snapped toward the trees. A single rider sat on his horse watching them. An older man, silver-haired, with a U.S. Marshal's badge pinned to his coat. Whitaker's face went slack with shock. Marshal Thompson, I didn't know you were in the territory. I am now, the marshal said, swinging down from his horse. And from what I've seen, it's about time some real law came to this valley. He walked over and looked at Whitaker's hand. Clean shot. Harrow was aiming to disable, not kill. A man with his reputation could have put that bullet right between your eyes. His reputation? Whitaker spat. He's a coward. The marshal raised an eyebrow. A coward? You mean the man who received the Congressional Medal of Honor at Buffalo Creek? The man who held off 30 Lakota warriors single-handed so his unit could escape? That coward? The clearing went dead silent. Leah stared at Caleb, her eyes wide with disbelief. You never told me, she whispered. Didn't seem important, Caleb mumbled, his jaw tight. The marshal turned his cool gaze back to Whitaker. I've been doing some investigating, Amos. Seems a lot of folks have lost their land to you under questionable circumstances. I've also heard reports about a hired gun you keep on your payroll, a man who favors a rifle with silver inlay on the stock. Caleb and Leah exchanged a look. The dying outlaw, the silver inlaid rifle. It all clicked into place. I think, the marshal continued, his voice hardening, that your time in this valley is over. You have 24 hours to be gone. Whitaker stared, his face a mask of fury. But the fight was gone out of him. Stripped of his power, he was just a bully with a broken hand. He and his men turned their horses and rode away, defeated. Well, Marshal Thompson said, checking his watch, that went about as well as could be expected. He turned to Caleb and Leah, his expression unreadable. Now then, he said, why don't we all go inside? It seems we have a lot to talk about. The journal was hidden in the jewelry box, tucked under a piece of velvet lining that had come loose in the corner. Laya found it hours after the marshal had left, after the dust had settled and a fragile piece had fallen over the cabin. Caleb stood in the doorway, his saddlebags packed. He was going to leave, disappear. It was the only way to keep Leia safe. But then he saw the tears streaming down her face, falling onto the faded ink of her sister's handwriting. "What is it?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Laya's voice shook as she read aloud. "My dearest Laya, if you are reading this, then I am gone. I know you, sister mine. I know the guilt you carry. You blame yourself for not being here. But you must understand, I sent you away. I couldn't let you watch me die." She paused, wiping her eyes. "But there is more. You must know the truth about the man I love." Caleb blames himself. I know he does. He thinks he should have been on that coach, but I begged him not to come. I knew the diagnosis, waiting in Denver, was a death sentence. I just wanted one last perfect morning. Watching him, remembering him whole and strong. The words hit Caleb like a physical blow. He sagged against the doorframe. "She knew," he breathed. "All along, she knew." Laya kept reading, her voice growing stronger with every word. "So you see, sister, there is no one to blame. Caleb is guilty only of loving me too much. And there is one last thing, a secret I never told him. Amos Whitaker served with Caleb in the war. At Buffalo Creek, where Caleb won his medal, Whitaker showed himself to be a coward. He has hated Caleb ever since, and I knew he was trying to ruin him, to take this land. My trip to Denver wasn't just for a doctor. I was meeting a lawyer. An old Army contact had given me proof of Whitaker's crimes. I was going to expose him, to protect my husband." The room was utterly still. Eliza hadn't been a victim. She had been a warrior, fighting for her husband until her last breath. "I knew the risk," Laya read, her voice thick with emotion. "I suspected Whitaker might try something. The Morrison gang was just a convenient cover. If anything happens to me on that road, Laya, it was Amos Whitaker. Protect Caleb for me." The weight of 2 years of guilt lifted from Caleb's shoulders. It wasn't his fault. It was never his fault. She had died protecting him. Leia looked up, her eyes shining with tears and something new. Hope. "There's a postscript," she whispered. "P.S. Caleb, my love. There is a ring at the bottom of this box. My grandmother's. She said it was for the woman brave enough to love a broken man back to wholeness. I think you'll know what to do with it." His hands shaking, Caleb reached into the box. His fingers found a small velvet pouch. Inside was a simple gold band with a single perfect sapphire that shone like a star. He walked toward Laya, the ring in his palm. "Laya," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I know I'm no prize. I'm older than you, harder than you deserve. I come with more ghosts than a graveyard. But if you'll have me—" "Yes," she whispered, cutting him off. A radiant smile broke through her tears. "Yes, you fool. Yes." He slid the ring onto her finger. It was a perfect fit. And as he pulled her into his arms, as his lips finally met hers without guilt or grief, Laya could have sworn she felt a change in the room. A lightness, a sense of peace, like a gentle whisper on the wind, saying, "Finally." And there you have it, a story of love born from ashes, of two broken souls finding their way back to the light. They learned that the heart is a big place, big enough to hold both the ghosts of the past and the hope for a future. If this story of the untamed West moved you, let me know in the comments. Where are you watching from tonight? Have you ever found an unexpected light in your own darkest moments? And if you want more tales of love, loss, and redemption, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. There are always more stories waiting in the shadows.